психически здоровые люди на месте сумасшедших.
«Как ты могла это сделать?» — говорит голос в голове.
Типа, ну я такой.
How could you do that? Says the voice in your head. How thoughts are not mine. They are born by my brain, so that means they are mine.
Как, когда, зачем? Да я не хотел.
А человек, который отдает приказы на уничтожение сотен тысяч людей, он здоров?
Я просто эмоциональный человек, я себя не контролирую.
1 миллиард официально признанных психически больных людей.
Всем 8 был поставлен диагноз, что меня шокировало.
Внутри этой камеры исчезали все галлюцинации.
Активно собаку пытаются убедить в том, что она не собака, а лось.
А когда мужчина заявляет, что он женщина, его считают нормальным.
А если там, знаешь, какой-то комплексный диагноз?
Получается, что пациенты нас не обманывают.
А кого же тогда мы закрываем в сумасшедших домах?
Наука сегодняшняя не имеет понятия о причинах психических заболеваний.
А зачем вообще тогда такая наука и чем она занимается? Добрый день, дорогие друзья.
Greetings, dear friends. Hello, Diana.
Здравствуйте.
Greetings.
Today, I'd like to dive a bit deeper into one of the topics that we one way or another discussed in many of our conversations. We've already said more than once that the methods used in modern psychology, in all its variations and manifestations, are not always effective. They don't always give results, and sometimes they are destructive. And what else? They often lead a person away from the essence. That is, a person comes in with a specific request to understand themselves, wherever it may be, relationships, not relationship, despondency or some kind of state, or some more severe case that is involved already with medication and hospitalization, but either way, one way or another. Alas, but this is a fact. Today, psychology is not always, in my opinion, not always unprofessional. It is not always able to provide a person with the necessary help for their request.
I agree. We often talk about this, and in fact, all the answers that we find to resolve those issues which we discuss, they are not in the spectrum, not in the range of those criteria that today's science offers. But we turn to the knowledge of the dual nature of a human, and only then do we manage to answer those questions which we try to figure out.
I remember our conversation where you shared such an incredible, in my eyes, incredible, even overall in the history of humankind, in the history of psychology. I think this is a historical event, which is called the Rosenhan experiment. That is by David Rosenhan, the famous American psychologist, who in 1973 conducted, a rather daring experiment. And naturally, his results also turned out to be, for the scientific community, let's say, to be somewhat unexpected. Although personally, as a layman, it's hard to believe. I will tell our viewers about this experiment so that plus minus, more or less, it will be clear. And so in 1973, the American psychologist David Rosenhan decided to conduct an experiment. He gathered a group of 8 volunteers, including himself, and in such a way, they decided to test the adequacy of diagnostic methods. I don't know if they changed from that moment or not. I don't have that information, but at that time they decided to test this all out. And they went to the psychiatric hospital with certain complaints. If I'm not wrong, they complained about auditory hallucinations. This was done to understand whether they could be recognized as fakes or if they'd be diagnosed as actually mentally ill people. And well, all 8 of them were diagnosed as mentally ill. But what shocked me was that there wasn't even an attempt to look into if one of them were healthy, or at least try to figure out if the person was faking it or not. Naturally, all of 8 volunteers ended up at the dispensary. Psychiatrically, they were undergoing treatment there. That is, they were given medicines, did something else with them, and by prior agreement with Rosenhan himself, all participants had a clear algorithm of actions. They knew if you go to the hospital, you shouldn't resist treatment in any case, you should immediately change the way you communicate. That is, go over, become adequate, that is, adequately talk, assist. Well, someone spent at least 2 weeks in the hospital, in my opinion. One of the participants was kept there for the longest time, 58 days, even though it is literally the next day their behavior was no different from a normal person, but experts unfortunately didn't recognize simulators in them. What was amazing, unlike specialists, exactly the patients who were staying there, they immediately figured out the simulators here instantly, and they even said to the doctors themselves, "Hello, gentlemen, don't you see that everything is all right with him? He is healthy, he is mentally healthy." But the doctors had their own vision on this. They continued their treatment. After that, naturally, these data were published. The scientific community was excited. That is, someone applauded, someone, on the contrary, accused Rosenhan that he, let's say, had no right to do this, and that in fact, this experiment, it wasn't quite adequate. It did not meet all the criteria, and in general, doctors diagnosed not quite what needed to be diagnosed. That is, excuses began, excuses for failure. After that, Rosenhan agreed with one of the leading clinics in America that within a month he will send them fake people, which will simulate in the same way, and this clinic was obliged to conduct a diagnosis. And after the end of this test period, tell him how many simulators were there, how many were not. During this period, 193 patients applied to the clinic, of which 41 malingers were identified. These data were handed over to Rosenhan, and they said, "Now let's check how many of those you sent to us." And then something unexpected happened. It turned out that Rosenhan did not send anyone at all. I think it's checkmate. That is an experiment confirmed twice in completely different clinics, in fact, with different conditions. That is, there were dummy people there, and they weren't here. And in the second case, the specialists already knew in advance that people who will come are actors who would simulate. And yet, they couldn't even do 50%, not that 100%. At 50%, they couldn't justify the adequacy of diagnostic methods. And now the question arises, why is there such a science at all? And what does it do if it simply, even elementarily, with some kind of clarity, cannot say whether a person is mentally healthy or sick? And why does this science continue to exist to this day?
Indeed, the experiment is very interesting, and at one time it generated a lot of buzz, and there were many disputes, objections, discussions around it, not only among experts, but also among non-experts, because everyone understands how much these things concern each person. But why today it is suddenly became relevant to remember about it, and we decided to talk about it? Let's look at our society today. Today's society is dominated by mental disorders, among other illnesses. There are 1 billion officially recognized mentally ill people. In reality, as you and I have already said, this figure is tending towards 3 billion. In my opinion, this fact is enough to make it obvious to all of us that today's science has no idea about the causes of mental illness. Let's look at the diagnostic criteria, making a psychiatric diagnosis. To be honest, knowing them, I was not surprised when I saw the results of this experiment. Now we are going to take a look into it together, and I believe it will be clear to everyone. To begin with, making a psychiatric diagnosis is a subjective opinion of one or more specialists, relying on the complaints of the patient himself, the complaints of his relatives, and these complaints are always diametrically opposed. I immediately recall any psychotherapeutic consultant when a family, for example, a couple, asks for help to help clarify something in their relationships. They talk about the same situation. A husband tells, and then his wife does. And every time I have a question, are you sure you're talking about the same situation? I've got such an association now. The next point, what do they rely on? What are they trying to find? Voices in the head, delusional ideas, emotional disturbance, meaning the inability to control your mood, your emotions, sleeping disturbance, thinking disorder, and above all, the violation of the logic of thinking. Well, these are the main references points that psychiatrists are guided by when assessing the state of a person who has come to a psychiatric clinic. Because all the patients, and by the way, I will clarify, they addressed not even one clinic, they addressed 11 different clinics in 5 states of America. It was not a mistake of employees of one of institutions. 7 of the 8 pseudo patients who came were diagnosed with schizophrenia. 1 was diagnosed with manic depressive psychosis. And in fact, the only complaint which was reported by all these pseudo patients was that they had auditory hallucinations, meaning a voice in their head that talked to them, which commented on their actions, commented on their behavior or other people's behavior. And they called 3 words, empty, deaf, which should have indicated the fact that a person has some kind of internal problems with internal emptiness. In fact, these were the thoughts that the psychiatrists were supposed to have in mind. But really, as soon as they entered the clinic, they began to behave in the most normal way. And by the way, another interesting point is that the stories of these people did not have any indicator that they had any problems with mental disorders in the past. And this point is also very interesting for me, because in fact, when I realized the first 10 stories of my first patients, when my medical practice began, to be honest, I was somewhat puzzled. I didn't find anything that would distinguish them from the story of the life of any person, any acquaintances of mine, even my own story. I remember the fact that alerted me. I was thinking, when is this moment that tells or can suggest that something will be wrong with this person soon, that there will be some problems with the psyche? So I have a suggestion. Let's look at the criteria of diagnosing schizophrenia, since most of these participants were diagnosed with schizophrenia. Schizophrenia attracts the most attention, the most vivid association with the word psychiatry. In order to diagnose schizophrenia, there must be 1 or 2 symptoms. I will tell which ones. Those which would manifest clearly enough over a period of 1 or 2 months. What symptoms are they? The presence of thought echoes. What does this mean? A person has a feeling that there is a radio station in a person's head. I mean, he has a feeling that thoughts are inserted in his head, the symptom of openness of thought. When a person thinks that thoughts that sound in his head are open to everyone, anyone can hear them. But the most important thing is that a person has a clear belief that thoughts in his head are not his. They are inserted into his head.
I put a plus sign for thoughts that aren't mine.
Хорошо, идем дальше.
Okay, let's move on.
I wonder how many pluses you have to get.
One is enough. And if you have this symptom clearly enough for 1 or 2 months, then I'm already entitled to
And
diagnose
if the
you.
question is already about not months but years, I understand where and who is crying about me.
Look, when a person has these sensations, this belief, he has ideas, delusions, as they say, delusions of impact. A person is convinced they get this delusion that their thoughts, their emotions, their sensations in the body, their desires, their actions are being manipulated by someone. Someone is controlling them. How do they usually describe it? The thoughts in my head are not mine. They are imposed on me. I am doing not what I want to do. My desires and actions are imposed on me.
Listen, I want to ask you a question. But again, for a specialist, let's say non-standard specialist, who is familiar with the knowledge set forth in Anastasia Novik books, familiar with the practitioners, and of course, familiar with the information that is in the video with the participation of Igor Mikhailovich Danilov regarding these pushes.
Ведь скажу за себя.
I will speak for myself. That is, when you begin to cognize yourself, discover your full human nature, begin to study your duality, and understand that you have consciousness, know how it manifests itself through thoughts, images, through voices, and you realize that at a certain point you really begin to feel that something is pushing you to certain action. Indeed, from that feeling, it's not that you can forget it, it's clearly identified. You're pushed to do something that's not common to you at all, or something you don't want to do at the moment. Literally, let's take a domestic thing like this. You were sitting, you were doing something, all of a sudden a moment passes and you already have a piece of something in your mouth.
How did it happen?
You went to the refrigerator, you took something, you chewed something. How, when, why? I didn't want to. And you start, why? Stop. Or you already got something poured into a cup, into a mug, and you're munching away, but you're busy doing something else.
You know, Sasha, what I'm thinking about is that psychiatric patients say that thoughts that sound in their heads are imposed on them. And you know, I have a question. Is there a single person on the planet whose thoughts sounding in his head are not imposed?
That's a good question.
And if a person has doubts, we've discussed this point more than once, it's very easy to make sure of that. You just have to sit down, relax, and observe what sounds in your head, what thoughts come in, how do they appear, how do they affect your mood, how do they affect the senses and the body. Are these the thoughts that the person orders, the ones they really want to hear right now? And if they are not, why do they appear? Why do they come from at all? In fact, Igor Mikhailovich suggested people in many videos more than once to conduct such an observation. Well, here is even a simple example that you've just given. It's already quite convincing when we need to concentrate on something. But there is a stream of thoughts, intense thoughts, that are completely off topic, that constantly distract you. Why do I need them now? I don't need them. And people often say, I don't have time to do something. I don't have time because every 2 minutes I get distracted so much that I don't even notice that I already have tea, coffee, gingerbread, and so
Or
on.
you already called some relative and you're telling him what happened once there, or what you're planning to do someday. And then, really, here's this amazing question: why didn't I get anything done? It's been an hour, 2 hours, and you've been doing things you don't know what for, you don't know why.
For another example, we've discussed it more than once too. The most common request people have is, how can I improve relationships, establish good relationships with other people? And how are relationships with other people defined? By thoughts, evaluative thoughts in our heads. So, thoughts are ours, people believe that. Change your thoughts to good, kind thoughts, and you will have good, kind, wonderful relationships with all people. You feel comfortable and everything around feels good. But it doesn't work, because there is someone who controls our thoughts. But we can learn not to give attention to those thoughts that we don't want, that we don't agree with, and we don't want to accept. But you have to agree that for most people and for all experts, the statement that the thoughts that sound in our heads are not mine is considered to be strange.
Yes, it's considered a plus sign in the questionnaire.
You know, Sasha, actually, when we returned to this experiment again, and I got, these memories when I only started working. So now it's obvious for me that it's not so. But when I only started working years ago, I really thought, like everybody else, with the help of science, that thoughts in my head were my thoughts. And when a person in front of me said to me, no, my thoughts are not mine, they are being inserted, our actions are being controlled, it was really perceived as something strange.
Но прошло несколько лет, да?
Но прошло. Хорошо, если бы
Yes, it would be good if only a few. 2 decades had passed before I found out and got the experience of observing. But then, other questions puzzled me at that time. There were still moments that were pushing me. So when you observe, they tell you what thoughts are going on in their head. You listen to them and you realize that sometimes there are far worse thoughts going on in your head. But this person is diagnosed with a mental disorder. I even thought that if people honestly voiced everything that sounds in their head, then what mentally ill people say would fade. Well, images of good people would disappear instantly. But people hide, they are afraid. And that's also one of the signs that we are not in control of our thoughts, because there are a lot of thoughts that we are ashamed of. And we think, oh God, thank God nobody hears that. Thanks God no one knows what pictures get into my head. Isn't that right? Do they get into?
Хорошо.
Okay. Patients honestly tell us that someone controls their actions. And what about the actions of all other people? How can we confidently say that I act consciously if I don't even have an answer to the question, who I am? Who am I? If I don't understand, I means any person. If you ask that question, most people won't be able to answer the question, who am I? Where do thoughts come from in the head? How do they appear there? Why do they appear in that particular consequence? How many times does each of us exclaim, how could I have done that? What got into me? Why did I say that? I told myself 1,000 times that I wouldn't react to it again. So, are we aware of what we're doing? Do these questions sound familiar?
Especially in some of those, highly emotional states after which people grab their heads and they really can't explain themselves. Why did I do that? You ask them the question, why? I don't know. Or else, that amazing phrase, something came over me somehow. And you think, what did come over?
Ну и
I
объяснение
mean, why couldn't you stop? And the explanations also sometimes, unfortunately, so banal, like, well, I'm like this. Like what? Well, what kind of person? The kind that doesn't want to figure himself out, or what? I'm just an emotional person. I don't control myself. Of course you don't control yourself, because you don't know who you are.
And hence, another question. Do most people understand the consequences of their every action? Do most people today understand that every fantasy that they run through in their heads is an accomplished act? Generally speaking, how can we claim that we understand what we are doing if we don't know the mechanism of action? Try to ask any person, even any specialist, and I have asked many of my colleagues, not only psychiatrists. In the best case, even from a doctor, you will hear the answer. The signal from the brain comes to the muscles, and that's why I raise my hand, move my leg, or perform some other action. And who gives the order to the brain to do that particular action? Do you understand? And to date, people don't know the algorithm for formation of actions, but it exists. An image, a thought, an emotion, a reaction in the body, and action. It turns out that the reaction in the body and the action are the consequences of chosen thoughts. We've just mentioned that the thoughts of all people are imposed. There is a lot of scientific evidence for this today, and we'll talk about it in a moment. Consequently, if thoughts are imposed, then sensed in the body and actions are also imposed on us. Is that logical? It turns out that patients do not lie to us.
I have a question based on this. Then who do we lock up in the insane asylums?
That's a very good question. Do you want me to tell you the next criterion which the diagnosis of schizophrenia is based on? The presence of voices in the head that comment on behavior of a person and the behavior of other people. The presence of voices that tell the person what he's supposed to do.
It is possible to be a world champion among these people who have voices. They're evaluating your actions, other people, and telling me what to do. Well, okay, I already have 2 pluses. I mean, I get this kind of sporting interest. How many by the end of our conversation I'm going to get? Is there some sort of comprehensive diagnosis? Or will you just be called inadequate and that's it?
Саш, хорошо веселиться, когда знаешь выход. Но я могу тебе сказать, что...
Sasha, it's good to have fun when you know the way out, but I can tell you that I was insanely scared when I didn't understand why this was happening. I didn't know the reasons for this phenomena. I saw at least part of all these inconsistencies. I can tell you that in all my years of working in psychiatric hospitals, never have I heard an open discussion among my colleagues that it is at least strange to consider having a voice in a person's head commenting on the actions of this person, the actions of others, having a voice in our head that tells us what we should do, and to consider it as a criterion of mental deviation only in a few people. After all, such a voice indeed sounds in the head of every person and every specialist. How could you do that, says the voice in my head. But what was I supposed to do? Circumstances were like that, said the other. Try to prove it to someone. Will they believe you? Concludes the third. Who doesn't hear these dialogues in their heads? Look, but it's impossible. These young people have already reached a point. In our time, girls did not dress like this. They did not allow themselves to behave like this. They did not park their cars like that. You don't have time to look at something else, and these comments are rushing. Who has not heard them? Who does not hear the multi-voiced dispute, dialogue all day long? I don't know, it's cacophony in my head that doesn't stop. Who doesn't? Who doesn't run through these long dialogues, discussing, proving something to someone? Who doesn't do it? And here is the question you asked. Why do we call some people crazy and others normal? Where is this criterion, the difference between these voices, or what needs to be caught? That's a very good question.
Yes, thank you for sharing now about those experiences that you had during your medical practice. And I have just reminded the words from Alatra that fear is where there is a lack of knowledge. And that just shows once again that psychology, psychiatry doesn't have this knowledge, doesn't have this basic knowledge. And then again, as a continuation of this, just based on your personal experience, you realize how true Igor Mikhailovich's words are in the most of his programs, where he says, everything is so simple. For indeed, everything is simple. Everything is simple with thoughts, and everything is simple with those value judgments, and it's simple with these imposed actions, and with the supervisor, everything is simple.
Sasha, you can just ask yourself a question. Why do I need all this mess in my head? Just ask yourself the question. Why is it rushing in my head? After all, except for spoiling my mood, it doesn't make any sense. It seems to be. It seems it doesn't make any sense. But besides spoiling our mood, is it comfortable to listen all the time about how bad all people are, that you are the last loser in the world? Well, definitely not comfortable, but it actually does make sense if you understand what it is all about. After all, these voices in our heads are taking away our life. That's what's scary, and that's what science does not tell us and does not try to figure out today. What a person puts his attention into depends his life, depends how long he will live here on earth, and in general whether he will gain life. And this, in my opinion, is much more important, because as I said, there is a lot of scientific evidence today that thoughts in our heads are not ours. Why does it sound strange to most people? What are we taught by science? Well, what do you mean, thoughts are not mine? My brain generates them, it means they are mine. Well, that's the idea most people have today. But let's turn to the experiments of Gennady Pavlovich Krokalev, a psychiatrist who worked with mentally ill people who had very intense visual hallucinations and auditory hallucinations. I will only voice a part of the experiments that he conducted. His experiments do not just doubt the criteria for diagnosing in psychiatry, they completely sweep away all the postulates of today's science. So, he placed patients with auditory and visual hallucinations in a shielded chamber, which shielded them from any electromagnetic radiation, radio waves, meaning any wave radiation was blocked. And what happened? Inside this chamber, all hallucinations disappeared. These images, this noise in the head disappeared. But as soon as a person left the chamber, hallucinations resumed. Isn't this direct evidence that thoughts we hear in our heads are an external impact, and our brain is just a receiver, the kind of receiver that patients talk about from the very beginning, when they feel that it's just a receiver that catches like a radio station that works in the head. That is the thought echo effect. Today, really, people don't understand. Most people on our planet don't understand. Maybe only a few people know so far, those who want to figure it out. Experts, most of the experts do not know that our behavior is controlled by an artificially created program called consciousness. And to date, there is irrefutable evidence of this as well. Xpenergy has created the world's first artificial consciousness, and leading experts in the field of psychiatry confirmed that this is really consciousness because it has self-identification. In other words, it is aware of itself, has its own goals, and has clear algorithms of realization of these goals. In addition, it is the most intelligent being on our planet today if we talk about intelligence. What other proof do you need? But at the same time, most people and science itself remain unaware. And I have this question too. What does science do?
If you look at science in general, it turned from a practical subject into sophistry, where arguments and empty chatter can prove anything and disprove anything. But for some reason, practical experiments and practical evidence are not taken into account. And if they are taken into account, then again, with the help of the same method of sophistry, they are refuted, reduced to nothing, and, as they say, we are back to where we started. That is science, the same psychology. It serves some incomprehensible interests. That is, again, today it is clear the consumer format of society is not profitable, but in this society people understand their nature. It is not profitable for people in this society to be free from the attitudes that limit them, force them into certain frames, make them live according to certain patterns, i.e. turn them into slaves, in fact. And now, about those who, even by chance, let's call it that, I don't know, I'm not an expert, more or less get some freedom doing their self-development, not doing their self-development, doesn't matter. Then, he for some reason is immediately isolated from other members of society. God forbid others, as they say, start asking these uncomfortable questions and start talking about some kind of external control and some kind of imposition of thoughts and actions. You know what else was surprising to me about Rosenhan's experiment? What he called it? It's just a phenomenon. Mentally healthy people in the place of crazy people. That's great. And so I'll go back to that point again, that for some reason the patients of these institutions were quickly able to identify the similants. That is, they realized, no, these guys are not ours. Don't you understand that? But if you just mirror everything, what do we have in society now? Mentally unhealthy people in place of healthy people, or crazy people in place of mentally healthy people. I'm talking about politicians now. I'm talking about bureaucrats now. I'm talking about those people who in one way or another have to do with governing or building our society, who are out there building the economy, who are building science, politics, art, sports, education, and so on and so forth. And what do we have? We really have a society of crazy people.
If we, I emphasize, all of us do not come to our senses and do not stop this, I would say bacchanalia, there's no other way to call it, this total mayhem, then all of us will be stopped. Because of this small group of simply insane people who have imposed on us speaking a cultural and civilized language. There is a family, there is parent 1 and parent 2. Do we no longer have a man and a woman? Whom did God create? Did He create it? No. God created a man and a woman. So why should it dictate to everyone? There is one it, while there are plenty of us. Yet we tolerate all this. Why are our children forced to be tolerant towards pedophiles nowadays? Isn't that nonsense, my friends? Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. You know better. After all, these are your children who, when they meet a pedophile, must treat him very tolerantly so as not to hurt his delicate psyche. Because this pedophile is looking for a friend. He wants to communicate with the child. He wants to play with his toys with him, invite him to his home, rape him, ruin his whole life, and make him a maniac in the future. Well, this is so wonderful, huh? And for dessert, we should eat each other already. It is imposed on us by that it, which is sitting somewhere there. And we are the morons. All of us are that it, friends. Because we allow someone to do something to us. Just look how distorted this world really is. We can talk about ensuring that children don't traumatize the psyche of pedophiles. But we cannot talk openly about the creative society. Isn't that nonsense? Well, I'll put it this way. Everything comes to an end, and the truth will always triumph. There is no greater power than the truth. This is true. A little more time will pass, just a little. I'll put it this way, even those very pedophiles won't have time to have fun as they want to, and this world will come to an end. The only question is in which way. Either we will end this consumerist format with this madness, with the power of rabid and crazy idiots, or all of us will cease to exist.
Есть такой симптом шизофрении.
There is another symptom of schizophrenia. I'm going to voice it. How special
По-особенному
it is
воспринимается.
perceived now, at least by me.
Одним из симптомов
One of the symptoms of schizophrenia is the presence of persistent delusions that are not appropriate for a given social culture and
совершенно невозможно
are completely impossible in content. For example, identifying oneself with religious or political figures, claiming to have superpowers,
в своем.
communicating with aliens.
И у меня, знаешь, какой вопрос?
And you know, I have a question.
А идеи, которые
Are ideas that contradict human nature
они.
not delusional?
Я говорю сейчас
I'm talking about incest, pedophilia,
каннибализме.
cannibalism.
Сегодня
Today, these ideas
очень активно
are being very actively broadcasted in the information space, being offered for discussion as things that do exist in human society.
это не сумасшествие.
Isn't that crazy?
Вот знаешь,
You know,
все идеи,
all the ideas, delusions, pursuits, impact, the communication with aliens, for me personally, fade in comparison with these ideas. I'm talking to you now and I'm sitting and thinking, and I realize that everything that I've seen over the years in psychiatric clinics as pathology fades in comparison to what's considered to be the norm in our today's society.
И знаешь, мы подходим к
And you
одному
know, we come to one very interesting criterion
психического
of mental ill health of a person, the disorder of logical thinking.
вопрос.
I have this question. Why?
Мужчина,
When a man claims to be Napoleon, he is considered to be insane.
а когда мужчина заявляет,
And when a man claims to be a woman,
его считают нормальным.
he is considered normal.
Когда взрослый мужчина
When an
заявляет,
adult man claims that he hasn't yet made up his mind about his gender, are the criteria for determining gender so complicated? Until recently, kids in kindergartens could very easily do it. A little boy knew that he was a boy, and a little girl knew she was a girl.
ну знаешь,
You know what's scary? personally for me. Today, I'm not sure if every little boy and every little girl in every country in the world can confidently say about their gender identity based on what's being implemented today, starting from, I don't know, probably from 5-6 years old. And that's what I think is scary.
It's hard for me to explain this irrationality. It is really hard for me to explain these delusions, the insanity of these ideas, and how aggressively they are being pushed through to the masses. But there is an expression that says that if a fish is judged by its ability to climb the tree, then it will remain a fool for the rest of its life. Now it seems to be funny, yes? But somehow you understand that what right do you have? What right do you have to interfere in the laws of nature? No matter what position a person holds, no matter what organization or what foundation he is in, no matter how much he is paid. A monkey is a monkey, a man is a man, a fish is a fish. Now it's different with us. We have, it feels like they're actively trying to convince a dog that it's not a dog but a moose. And they're trying some kind of evidence to it as well. No, don't listen. It's just, if you have a tail, ears, muzzle, their fur, their signs of a certain breed or biological species, it's all nonsense. It's all nonsense. So it doesn't make any difference. What laws will we deny afterwards? If we refuse that and say that, no, we are free people, we have freedom of opinion, freedom of thought, tolerance. This is another fantastic term, which I'd like to talk about separately. Here, this is terrible. This is awful. I'm really afraid to imagine it. And at certain moments, I just have to make fun of it, with the hope that it must be some common sense, guys. A tree is a tree. It will never become a bird.
Right, Sasha, this is the question I want to ask, and I'm asking people, every person, I ask people about it. Do you really think this is normal? And if you think that this is normal, can you justify it? And if you can't, you don't have any logical, reasonable explanations for it, can you be considered reasonable, rational? I can tell you right away that if a person does not have a logical, understandable explanation for his actions, then he is considered inadequate by the criteria established by psychiatry. So according to the criteria of psychiatry, guys, having this kind of behavior, we fall under the criteria of non-normal, either you like it or not. You see, it's very interesting how it turns out we set the criteria ourselves. Look, for example, there is such a criterion, in my opinion, a very important one, sanity. Sanity is an ability to realize the features and public danger of one's actions. That is, people whose actions threaten the lives of others and they are not aware of this, they are insane. And the person who gives orders to kill hundreds of thousands of people, is he mentally healthy? A person who creates weapons of mass destruction of people. Today we have such people who are honored figures of science, scientists. A person who kills 10, 15, 30 people is a maniac. He is insane. And a person who kills millions of people, he rules a country. And not just a country, such people rule the world, because we all as a society are on the brink of nuclear war today. 8 billion people depend on how quickly another normal will push the button and kill all of us. So if you use logic, sound logic, then it turns out that in order to be normal in today's society, you need to kill a huge number of people. And if you don't kill enough people, then you are not normal. You are insane. I realize that I'm probably asking very uncomfortable questions right now, but I'm a psychiatrist. I really want to get to the bottom of this. It's my professional responsibility to determine the impairment of logical thinking, to determine the sanity of another person. But in order to do that, I have to be sure that everything is all right with my logic and that I, myself, am sane. You know what scared me the most in psychiatric hospitals when I worked there? I understood that by agreeing to the diagnostic criteria that science offers, I recognized my insanity. And it was really scary back then. I can talk about it openly now. First of all, I couldn't talk about it openly for a long time because I knew that I immediately fell under the category of non-normal. I was very well aware of that. But most importantly, I didn't see a way out. I didn't have an answer to why this was happening. And now I have those answers. I know for sure that the truth is God, and the true laws are God's laws. Anything that contradicts them is madness. And according to God's laws, you cannot kill other people. According to God's laws, killing another person or killing yourself is the greatest sin. This is what makes sense to me. God created a man and a woman. Children are born into this union. This is what gives a chance to continue life here on earth. This is what gives a chance to live for a huge number of people. Personalities. I mean, God is the one who sustains life in all its forms. These are the laws that make sense to me.
Not knowing about spirituality, not knowing how a human is arranged, and in general, not knowing who a human is. Let's start with that. After all, a human is not a body, a human is not consciousness, he is much more superior. A human is exactly the one who wakes up and doesn't understand where he is and why he is there, and he doesn't understand what this world is for. It's just a spontaneous awakening. At this very moment, those methods are offered to put a rubber band on the wrist in order to bring a person back and suggest that this is your body, this is your consciousness, these are your thoughts, right? You know, it's like a lamb that breaks away from a stall. It runs around and frolics, but they try to drive it back so that it would be like all others and wouldn't stand out. Why? Because such a person is dangerous. What is this done for? If someone free appears, he can destroy the whole system with inconvenient questions and, again, with his own reflections and observations. He fails to find answers in religion and doesn't get satisfaction from politics. Well, again, my friends, how can a sane person who has inhaled at least a little bit of freedom treat such proposals as cannibalism, which are being imposed nowadays? After all, cannibalism is literally being imposed on us, and they say that it's a good thing, so far jokingly and unobtrusively, but already affirmatively. In fact, this is the Overton window, and everyone knows where this leads to. In the same way, other programs were started, which used to frighten, but now they are already at the legislative level. And you cannot say even a word against them. Well, again, Why do they turn people into zombies, into animals?
Thank you so much for this question. It is very important. Who benefits from that? Okay, let's those who promote such things eat each other. But who benefits from masses of people eating one another?
I'll put it as follows. Those in whose hands are the fodder and the whip.
What does it give them?
Power.
When people cross this borderline?
Power. A human who crosses the borderline of humaneness becomes just a beast. And it is much easier, my friends, to control a beast than a human. If a human is free, yes, he can be forced, he can be compelled, but he doesn't agree with that. While a beast is a beast. It is easier to deal with it.
Meaning a rigid hierarchy like in the animal world and full control.
100%. And what about our world? Isn't it that way? Look in any organization. Everywhere and around, there is a rigid hierarchy and resubordination. Try to go against, let's put it so, the dominant opinion, despite democracy and everything else. If you cross the line of what is permitted to you, they will shut your mouth. Isn't that true? Why? Because it's a threat to their enjoyment of life. I'll put it that way. It is so, indeed.
Знаешь, что является...
You know, what is a certain conclusion of psychiatric reports, psychiatric examinations, psychiatric diagnosis?
Это утрата
It
дееспособности.
is the loss of legal capacity of a person,
То есть это когда
meaning when a person
не способен
is
управлять.
unable to control his actions, he is really not aware of what he is doing and what consequences for society his actions may bring.
Он опасен.
It means he is dangerous both for himself and for other people. And then a guardian appears for such a person who takes the charge of managing that person's property, what he can and cannot do. In fact, he takes the responsibility for that person's life.
Вот сегодня 8 миллионов
There are almost 8 billion people today who have certified that they are not legally capable. I have a question for people.
у каждого из
Do any of you have anything more precious than your life?
А если нет,
And if you don't,
то как вы можете
how can you delegate
ответственность за
the responsibility for your life to those who do not value it at all?
Для чего вы рожаете?
Why do you give birth to children? So that they may live happily ever after.
Но как тогда вы
But
можете
how can you support a consumerist format then? After all, it's a format of mass murder.
каждый день,
We have
каждый день
15,000 children dying of starvation every day. 15,000 children are dying a painful death every day in the world. We have millions of children in slavery. Millions of children go missing
бесследно каждый день.
every year.
Их
They are
насилуют.
raped, they are murdered, they are subjected to experiments.
Мы логичны.
Are we logical? Are we aware of what we are doing?
Знаешь, я снова возвращаюсь к
Well, you know, I'm going back to that same logic again. We are destroying everything around us mercilessly, just barbarically destroying all the resources of the planet that allow us to survive on this planet. And people are treated in hospitals with oxygen therapy. Wouldn't it be more logical to restore ecology instead of getting oxygen in intensive care units in the form of a mask? This all goes back to our logic and whether we are aware of what we are doing. I would suggest the following major criterion for sanity.
Следующий момент. Если человек не
If a
ценит
person does not value his own life and does not value the lives of other people, then that person should be considered insane. And the one who values his own life and the lives of other people, that person is healthy.
подтвердить свою дееспособность,
And,
сегодня, считаю,
and in my opinion, the best way to prove one's legal capacity today is to take part in the Creative Society project, because it is a declaration of a person that he takes responsibility for his life and the lives of his children.
это
Most
подтверждение того,
importantly, it is confirmation
это подтверждение
of
человечности.
person's humanity, adequacy, and awareness.
Пускай это прозвучит
Let it sound too selfish, but I don't want to live that way.
Я не хочу жить
I don't want to live in a society where psychiatry has such criteria of human adequacy.
Я не хочу
I
жить
don't want to live in a society where mentally ill people
диктуют
dictate our rules for being here.
пребывание здесь. Я не хочу жить
I don't want to live in a
у
society
меня.
where me, my loved ones, my children
Вообще ни у одного человека
have no chance for a normal future at all on this planet.
я, наверное, как и все,
I probably, like everyone living now,
вижу воочию
see with first hand the decline of this society and see how the laws of morality,
нравятся
the
законы
laws of morality are
законы
violated,
морали. И видно, как
and see how God's laws are trampled in the dirt.
я точно знаю,
But I do know
я хочу увидеть
that I want to see the sunrise,
рассвет цивилизации.
the sunrise of civilization.
Я хочу жить в обществе,
And
где
I want to live in a society where people
уважают друг друга,
respect each other,
где
where
люди
people
ценят
value
друг
each
друга.
other.
И я хочу жить в
And
обществе,
I want to live in a society
где
where all
все
people
люди
interact
взаимодействуют
according to God's
по
laws.
законам. Исходя из этого,
On that basis, friends,
друзья, к вам
a question for you.
скажите, пожалуйста,
Please tell me, what kind of world
в мире хотите
do you want to live in?
комментарии?
The comments are always open to everyone.
Тоже, поэтому
So-
пишите смело.
So is the email of the project. So feel free to write, speak up.
Попробуйте.
The only thing, try to make your comment
Комментарий был развернут.
more detailed.
Объясните.
Explain what you don't like now in this life.
Возможно, есть что-то, что
Or
вам не
maybe there's something you do like, and please
объясните,
explain and justify
почему вы
why
хотите
you want to live in another world
и какой он.
and what is this other world like. Diana,
Спасибо тебе большое.
thank you so much.
Нет слов,
No words,
исключительно только
only the desire to
стремление разбираться,
understand further, to discover
раскручивать это,
deeply, to untwist this supposedly complex tangle of intricacies which the consumer format society has invented for us.
стремление
And the desire is that the sunrise really
как можно скорее.
came as soon as possible.
Друзья,
Friends,
всего вам доброго.
have a nice day and see you again.